Genshin is one of the most wholesome, boring, sunshine and rainbows games you'll ever come across, right? I've heard it said before, and it couldn't be further from the truth. I'm the unlikely Genshin gamer, and in honor of Halloween night and the birthday of our resident troll and storyteller, Kirill Chudamirovich Flins, how about a tale or two about some of the most disturbing stories in Genshin Impact that you may not know about? Also, if you're waiting for my thoughts on the phenomenal Luna 2 quest, don't worry, it's in the works as we speak. But I thought I'd give you all this little appetizer I've been working on in the meantime. And, in keeping with the spirit of Nodcry, what with examining its connection to the moons and the Moon Maiden's experimental people, like the Fae, I thought it might be fun to highlight some of those atrocities committed by the strange, not quite right offspring of non-humans. Since there are so many deliciously macabre stories to choose from, let's do some nation hopping, and you can tell me in the comments at the end which one takes the cake. But first, a word from the sponsor of today's video, Top Up Live. Top Up Live is a platform that provides a cheaper and, more importantly, safe way to get your favorite in-game currency, like those coveted Primo Gems. Not only safe and more affordable, but it's also easy. Just sign in, choose your favorite game, and follow the prompts, like adding your UID and server if you chose Genshin or Star Rail. They have guaranteed bundles to smoothly ensure your favorite character, and they even have the new Miliastra Wonderland currency of Chronal Nexus for your custom character skins, all at a discount. If game currency isn't your thing, they have CD keys and gift cards as well. So, if you're trying to pull for Nefer, especially after seeing her performance in that awesome quest, or any of her banner companions, and are in need of more gems for less, check out my code in the pinned comment and description for an extra 12% off of the already discounted price. Thanks again to Top Up Live for sponsoring this video, and good luck to anyone wishing for Nefer. Now, let us begin with a tale from Sumeru's wild, deadly deserts, where Nefer hails from, where life is cheap, and desperation could drive a man to down the blood of an animal to slake his thirst. This tale is of the vengeful moon fairy Liloupar and her cursed inbred children, who brought down the kingdom of Gurabad with the flare of a nightmare. In the days that followed the death of the great moon maiden of the desert, but before the Red King fell victim to his delusions, one of the unholy offshoots of that mistress of flowers set in motion a plan to bring her husband, Ormazd, and his gem of a kingdom, Gurabad, to ruin through her unfortunate children. And it began with poor, mad Shirin. So prophesied the vengeful genie. Shirin shall fall in love with a great hero, and the progeny of their union will surpass their father. Her relatives will enjoy a sweet end, and she alone will be given possession of her father's kingdom. And to that newborn daughter she said directly, "Your joy will bring tears to your father's eyes. You will no longer feast at our table after you are wedded, and your child will be an ill omen upon the king's land." Wild, beautiful Liloupar's fury at her husband, who had become the very tyrant he had vowed never to be, seemed to know no end. Shirin grew up with these curses and prophecies hanging over her head, and slowly they began to drive her to insanity. Eventually, her father, Ormazd, would give her hand in marriage to his beloved adopted conqueror son, Kisra, the great hero. Yet, unbeknownst to all, Kisra was Liloupar's child as well, abandoned as a youngster. All a part of her dastardly plan, and she watched misery upon misery unfold for both her children and husband with satisfaction and joy. Kisra brought Shirin, his both sister and wife, no happiness whatsoever. Indeed, her sanity only fled more as the marriage continued. And as prophesied, Shirin was now banned from the feasts and banquets that her father attended, ostracizing her from the rest of her family. So, on the night of an illustrious banquet that she was yet again excluded from, despite all her other 300 siblings being allowed to attend, lonely, crazy Shirin hatched an evil plot. Under the guidance of her vengeful mother's hidden influence, Shirin and her reluctant husband Kisra had the servants of the banquet mix deadly scorpion venom into the honeypot for the event. And one by one, every single person fell into a sleep of death. A sweet end. Then, to cover their tracks, troubled Kisra Parvezravan, now king in his father's stead, punished the servants for this act of regicide, drowning them in honey themselves, even as they cursed his name with their last sticky breaths. Kisra the hero soon became Kisra Parvezravan the tyrant. And when Shirin had a son, her cherished Shiruya, Kisra remembered Liloupar's other prophecy about the child of Shirin who would be the downfall of his father, and had him banished as he became an adult, forced to wear a brass mask and flee from the kingdom lest he take it, further devastating his mother. But the final elaborate stage of Liloupar's 3-generation plan would bring him back to fulfill the prophecy anyway. Through poisonous dreams in the night, Liloupar counseled greedy, paranoid Kisra to construct ingenious machines and weapons powered by the spirits of the jinn to bring him endless wealth and prosperity. The young king eagerly followed the advice, unaware of its true origin. He forced his wife Shirin, in tune as she was with the power she had inherited from her mother, to churn out mindless, broken jinn spirits, damaged goods to entrap in these machines, to drive them and power them despite the torment it caused them. And for a time, the people of Gurabad shared in their king's new wealth. Water and riches grew more abundant in Gurabad, but not for long. As his greed grew, Kisra made a seemingly wondrous decree. Slavery was to be abolished in the kingdom. The people were liberated from their labors. So too were they liberated from the certainty of their next meal or a place to lay their head. Slave masters were required to provide these things, but not employers. And then even the promise of a steady job to fulfill these needs slipped away as the machines stole away the very jobs the people were counting on. Night and day, taskmasters drove the wailing, screaming jinn with 9-tailed whips, and the jinn inside of those cursed machines grew hateful and wicked. The few citizens that were required to operate the machines began to become the outlet of the spirit's fury. Fingers, limbs, and lives were ground away in seemingly random accidents. The overseers tried to keep things quiet, but word spread. The spirits in those machines are deliberately maiming their operators. And all the while, beautiful, benevolent Liloupar drifted amongst the people like an envoy of mercy, healing their hurts replacing whole limbs where she could, and weeping for those who had died, while whispering to the people of her savior. Shiruya, the banished brass-masked prince, the last component in her plan of revenge. He would save them and the Jinn from their torture and neglect, and the people quickly adopted this sentiment. How intoxicating was the scent of a plan reaching fruition. As the people grew frenzied, calling for the king's head, making symbolic brass masks for themselves, Liloupar disguised herself as Shirin, Shiruya's mother who truly yearned for his return, and went to him in the desolate sands, offering him a prophecy of victory. Why languish out here in the desert, my son, when the throne is yours to have, should you only muster the courage to take it? Shiruya made haste back to the kingdom, where the people welcomed and supported him with open arms. It is said that Shiruya found and stabbed his hated father to death in his bed. And yet, the murder brought him no comfort, and he cried to his mother for forgiveness for the deed. Through some mysterious interjection from Liloupar, Kisra actually became a raging abyss monster as the city began to fall into the throes of a gruesome uprising. The people stormed the palace and places of residence of the aristocracy, at one point killing and eating the high priest. So angry and desperate were they for food and change that Gurabad itself was nearly completely destroyed. Then only a few years later, Shiruya went mad with regret and wandered the desert wilds, falling into a great chasm from which erupted a horrendous black calamity. This madness, called Shiruya's plague, sickened and slaughtered the rest of the people of Gurabad. And so fell that great kingdom after all. It is said that the undying spirits of Liloupar's 3 cursed children still wander the desert to this day. Shirin looking for her beloved son, Shiruya maddened by the murder of his father, and Kisra warped by greed and the abyss. And only then was Liloupar's fury at her husband abated. What a wicked mother indeed. Speaking of wicked mothers, why not visit the land that until recently was teeming with false humans? The Oceanids are said to be the children of the angels as well, which makes them, like the Jinn and the Fae, children of moonlight, and in this case, primordial water. For that reason, Fontaine will receive extra attention. In my opinion, it remains the worst place in Teyvat to be a child. Let us continue with the House of the Hearth, back when it still had a mother, where that mother's deeds could scar even cold, cursed Arlecchino. Crucebena, the previous knave of the Fourth Harbingers, and close colleague of Il Dottore, had an even more wicked approach to raising her children than Liloupar. In the orphanage known as the House of the Hearth, one of many, many orphanages in Fontaine, the rule of law was to become the strongest, the worthy candidate of the title of king. What better way to do that than to make every single interaction between the children be a test of endurance, with death or experimentation by Dottore be the standing consequence for failure. Crucebena was a very prudent mother, so no child was put to waste, no matter how maimed they were after her games. Surely, a visit to the doctor would provide a second chance to be helpful. One pastime game that produced many helpful children was the game of Mare, or HopScotch as you may know it. Light-footed leaps, boisterous laughter. The memories married to Mare were always wonderful, like the kiss of radiant sunshine. As such, at first, the children were perplexed when their father was torn between assigning at ease or danger to that code word. Little did they know that in the house that came before, Mare was not a game. Under Crucebena's cruel reign, Mare was used as a means of rooting out the weak and gathering fodder to hand over to the doctor, as per their deal, so he could have damaged goods to tinker with. Perhaps he created some of the angry original Fatui who have always seemed in some way unwell from these rejects, augmenting the children who came to him damaged nearly beyond repair until they could be of use again. The game of Mare was simply to continue the endless hopping and balancing and picking up the little beanbag until you were the only one left who hadn't fallen into the field of upturned knives too many times to get up again. The big squares drawn on the ground were completely surrounded by knives and other sharp instruments to stab and impale the children were they ever to stumble, miscalculate, or collapse from sheer exhaustion. Poor, wretched orphans, skewered throughout their small bodies, and then sent to the doctor, were they unlucky enough to survive all their falls. There was no escape and no hope in that place, except for sweet little Clearvy, Crucebena's own daughter. Despite the fact that her mother treated her especially harshly, Clearvy escaped to tell the people of Fontaine about the cruelties of that place many times. Pity her pleas never made it to Nouvelette's desk in the Palais Marmonia. Instead, all the adults a child is taught to trust, who could have brought this matter to Nouvelette's attention, were ultimately in the employ of the house and Crucebena. So, when dear, hopeful Clearvy approached one of these supposed heroes for help, she was sent back to the house and severely punished. Eventually, she did give up hope and asked her friend Perware to end her life for her, since there was no escape after all. In the end, Arlecchino, the new father of the house, decided not to taint the current children's happy ideas of Mare by coding the word danger and explaining its dark past. For them, Mare was left to truly symbolize fun and ease. Our next tale also hails from Fontaine, since so many tragic stories do. The ugly, twisted background to the phenomenal Archon quest of the region. A story of murderous drug dealers, serial killers, and human experimentation. I really don't think it's an accident that Fontaine featured this sort of crime at endemic rates. After all, their Archon was much more interested in collecting indemnitium from the Teyvat trials to fuel the crucial rebellion from the Heavenly Principles. That meant it was good for so many crimes, and therefore trials, to make their way before the Oratrice Mécanique d'Analyse Cardinal. Now, the crux of Fontaine's plight, the fact that Fontainians could dissolve in the rising primordial seawater, was broken wide open by the solving of a 20-year-long serial disappearance case that quickly became a serial murder case, and then even more. Most people know by now that Vacher, likely named after Joseph Vacher, a 19th century French serial killer who you definitely want to look up, was kidnapping women to find out how to undissolve his lost love. But not everyone knows just how nasty that scheme became. First, Vacher began kidnapping women that were a similar age to his fiancée, so he could test and see what kind of condition could make them dissolve at all. Being Snezhnayan, he was immune to the primordial sea, but he didn't know about it at all yet. So, although he endeavored to experiment on himself as well, that was no use. He tried all kinds of other things first. Being as desperate as he was, I don't think it's a stretch to say he likely tested everything that could have been in that water Vacher dissolved in. Acid, hot water, prolonged exposure, near drowning, special plant extracts or chemicals. Painful tests indeed, but not productive yet. And every time a girl died through his efforts, he'd simply kidnap another. Who knows what he did with those early bodies until he could dissolve the evidence away. But then he stumbled upon the knowledge of primordial water and the research of past amoral genius Jacob Ingold. Back in those days, Jacob and his adopted brother, Narcissenkreutz, had been researching how to dissolve Fontainians while capturing their will, so they could gather many wills into one body, creating a tremendously powerful presence to rival that of a descender. That plan eventually failed, of course, but Jacob's playbook became Vacher's Bible. He discovered a leak where he could endlessly harvest primordial seawater, and the location became his base of operations. Then he got to real work. His experiments took a new, exciting turn, because in the process of slowly dissolving his victims to see how this new substance worked, while finding out if there was any way to retrieve a person who had become one with the sea of voices, he found out that in the right concentration, primordial seawater became a recreational drug, giving its users an addictive sense of euphoria, even while gradually damaging their insides, perhaps turning them to mush. This discovery of the marketable properties of the primordial sea was a jackpot. The dangerously addictive synth was born. Now he had found a way to fund his increasingly expensive human experiments, with excess money to splurge and share. Synth quickly became a Fontainian drug pandemic, with the poor and destitute especially hard hit and dragged for all they were worth. And all the while, the painful experiments continued. Often, he'd have multiple victims at a time to test all sorts of things. It's known that he had at least 24 victims, including poor Aurelie, whose promising theater production Farina personally helped to bring to completion after her death. Her testimony was one of, if not the only one, that survived Vacher's vigilant destruction of evidence. Up until the traveler ended up helping to dismantle the case. For Vacher, business was booming, and the girls were rolling in. Then it got even nastier. Raise your hand if you remember Potton from Siegewin's story quest. Dude was so cut up about not having pretty privilege that he ended up in the skincare business with Vacher. Of course, he started out trying to make money to help his grandmother, but as they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And his business became so much worse than a bid for medicine. It was found out that using just the right formula of primordial water, that was, get this, once a person, one could make a potion to tweak their appearance, from minor changes to plastic surgery in a bottle. So, Potton became Vacher's evidence disposal system, taking the dissolved remains of Vacher's unfortunate girls and turning them into ingredients for his absolute hit of a skin cream, Butterfly Dew. The rich lapped it up, smearing on the remains of their dead countrymen and gushing about their glowing complexion afterwards. Only the very tip of what Vacher did to his victims was known by the time his carefully built empire of drugs and murder fell apart. For months afterwards, the extra details continued to trickle in. Even Potton's enterprise didn't begin to decline until Fontainians simply couldn't dissolve anymore, thanks to Neuvillette. As I mentioned before, Fontaine truly is filled with cases of this sort. Take Wriothesley's tragic upbringing, for example. Make of this what you will, and remember to comment if you know more. And while you do that, allow me to venture into Natlan, where one of Grand Alchemist Gold's undying monsters was carving swaths of dripping red through the nation, until a truly gruesome plan had to be enacted to stop the carnage. Most people know by now about the arrogant Conrian alchemist and sinner Rheindotter, also known as Gold, and how her creations made with no regard for natural order or restraint are responsible for a huge chunk of what made the abyssal invasion of 500 years ago so memorably devastating. One such creature, perhaps the worst of them all, was the Bakunawa, that appeared in West Natlan during the invasion. It is an abominable child of its ambitious mother, so it counts on this list. The Bakunawa was and is an otherworldly beast that Gold seems to have accidentally made while tinkering with abyssal energy. The monster's instinct to devour is astronomical, so much so that it ate a piece of its creator, Gold, before going on to tear apart the people of Tenochtitlan, one bite at a time. Imagine a walking mouth filled with razor-sharp teeth, the size of a freaking mountain, with the ability to pick up and chew through whatever it encountered. Then add the fact that it couldn't even die. All it did was get bigger and bigger no matter what. Chop off its head? It will just pick it back up or grow another. Blow it up? The pieces just find each other again and reattach, or it regrows them. Tenochtitlan was already fairly sparsely populated because of the migration of almost the entire tribe thousands of years ago. The same people, by the way, who became the founders of the Knights of Favonius. But who was left became a snack for this immortal beast as it made its way toward the mainland of Natlan. The scariest thing really was its infinite growth and immortality, because this left its victims with absolutely no means of escape once it hit their town or village. It didn't matter how freaking strong you were when the severed head would just come back again. As you may imagine, the tribes were getting desperate for something to do. Whole entire villages had been eaten by this thing. The solution turned out to be a brave, gruesome plan, whose byproduct required the intervention of the powerful animal Archon. You may have heard of the mighty outcast Tenoch, who rallied the great ancient name-bearers of the time with his persuasive greatsword, the talking stick, always in hand. He was a giant of a man, but what's more is that he was the very last survivor of that animal tribe who had been driven away. Aside from uniting the warring tribes under the common cause of driving back the Abyss, Tenoch earned his place in history for the Battle of the Mare Jivari that took place on his original home island of Tenochtitlan, and that cost both he and Sanhaj, Ororan's previous ancient name holder, their lives. The wretched, now truly massive, unkillable thing was lured to a spot on the island, and then Sanhaj, legendary border master of the Masters of the Night Wind, cast the most epic spell of his time, with the brave Tenoch as the ritual sacrifice. One of the most important things that the shamans of the Masters of the Night Wind do is to maintain and traverse the border between life and death. When so many dead are being generated, leaving behind orphaned spirits, it was their job to shuttle them across the border between realms into the Night Kingdom. So a border master was one who could manage this system with exceptional skill, even creating realms of their own or expertly persuading the Lord of the Night in grave matters, such as the situation with the Bakunawa. Sanhaj and Tenoch's bloody plan went as follows. Tenoch bravely allowed Sanhaj to engrave his body all over with inscriptions of phlogiston writing, a type of language used to alter matter itself to a certain degree, designating his forfeited body as a border sacrifice for the next horrid step of the plan. Then, with these writings written into his very flesh, Tenoch allowed the Bakunawa to consume him, piece by piece. With the engraved sacrifice now positioned in the belly of the beast, Sanhaj called his most powerful magic to use this great offering to summon an actual Night Kingdom itself inside of the Bakunawa. An alternate realm, the ferocity of Tenoch's undying spirit, and the will of the Lord of the Night in this mini Night Kingdom all clashed spectacularly and blasted the beast to smithereens all over the island. No one in the vicinity survived the blast, including Sanhaj, and certainly not poor, chewed-up Tenoch. The chaotic energy that had been unleashed damaged the surrounding area until it became the scorched and ash-laden land known as the Mare Jivari. But the fight wasn't really over, if you can believe it. Actually, quite far from it. After all that sacrifice and pain, the problem was perhaps worse, though it would take time to realize it. Although for the people of Natlan, immediately afterwards, the monster was actually gone, suppressed from regenerating because of the energies in the area, it was, of a truth, not dead. Like I said, it actually cannot die. And the place itself was now a spreading disaster. So, strangely enough, Venti, the secretly mighty animal archon, using the time powers he had inherited from the ruler of time herself, removed the place called the Mare Jivari from the timeline. The movie called Teyvat's History now has a missing frame that's been turned into a little pop-up window playing at its own pace, jumping around through history without following the rules now. Still accessible by adventurers like Stanley of Mondstadt, but at the very least, the seeping poison of the land was now contained. This means that a Mare Jivari now exists from 1,000 years ago, even though the place was only created 500 years ago. And in that nasty windless place, the Bakunawa bits had enough time to recover and grow again. That's right. Sanhaj and Tenoch's sacrifices bought the world hundreds of years of time, and Venti ensured the aftermath stayed contained But the damned beast isn't gone. And as Stanley the adventurer unfortunately realized, trapped as he was in that place, there were now many, many of them. Hundreds of little Bakunawa running around in this burning ash field, eating each other and growing infinitely. Dragging himself across that desolate place, after ensuring his companions' safe retreat, Stanley documented them and his own slow death. One of the monsters had taken some bites out of him, leaving him gruesomely injured. And even though he did receive some help, Stanley eventually met his end while spying on one of the biggest of the mini Bakunawa, a behemoth of a specimen who saw him looking, processed that there was even more to devour than its fellow species, and slurped poor, doomed Stanley in a few bloody bites. The notes the lost adventurer left behind can be found in the belly of the beast, blood-splattered and hopeless. Because of the nature of that place, separated as it is from the timeline, Stanley's spirit also remained stranded in that windless place, forgotten by all. Only his friend, Hans Archibald, still worked to keep the memory of the great Stanley alive in the hearts of Mondstadters and would-be adventurers. He had spiraled into alcoholism because of the haunted memory of Stanley's sacrifice to save him. But one day, he finally got the chance to provide Venti with high-quality memories which allowed the Animal Archon to retrieve his soul from that place and lay it to rest in the ley lines where it should have been. Now a new massive Bakunawa exists in that place, biding its time to escape, and is only held at bay by Venti's initial intervention and the united efforts of previous Pyro Archons working to maintain the separation. Why on earth was Gold so freakishly nasty with her experiments? And why did she let them inhabit the world? If you ask me, she should have catapulted the failed thing into outer space, rather than have it tear up Natlan. But I guess that's a sinner for you. The last of the five is actually not related to inhuman things at all. In fact, it's a very human story of how when people in power forget about those who look up to and follow them, tragedy can happen. The Fatui have very often seemed and proudly played the part of the villains of Teyvat, callously enacting plans of coldly calculated efficiency for what they believe to be a justified reason. But sometimes, especially depending on which Harbinger they answer to, they can be very human and heroic, and proud to be known as someone others can count on to keep them safe. Like the Ninth Company in the Chasm of Liyue, who had been sent along as a diplomatic party tasked with researching the black filth in the chasm and its connection to the cataclysm, in order to find a way to keep the people of Liyue safe from it, and to forward their own understanding of it. The mortal enemy of everyone, Snezhnaya included. It was a noble and heroic task, the righteous captain told them. There must be no deserters on this important mission. Yes, sir, was the enthusiastic response, and the 64 soldiers set out to complete their task with alacrity. But footmen hardly ever know or understand the machinations of their superiors, who move them about like pawns and forget some of the pieces at the edge of the board in foreign territory. To be fair, what became of the Ninth Company wasn't the captain's fault, but it happened all the same. Years after this mutually beneficial deal was made between Snezhnaya and Liyue, the process of collecting gnosis was well underway, and Sinura's method for obtaining Rex lapises, together with his special request for the circumstances of it, saw the Fatui become rancid enemies in the eyes of the people of Liyue. After all, the collective Fatui unleashed an old enemy god on the harbor, right as their beloved Archon had met his untimely end, forcing the Adepti out of seclusion and driving the great Tianshuan, Ningguang, to have to destroy her wondrous jade palace. The collective Fatui were now enemy number one. Almost all of them were to be arrested on sight, especially those in a combative position. They were also no longer to be supported. Theirs was not a friendly relationship any longer. But no one told the soldiers in the chasm that it was time to pack it up and go, or even that they had to continue without support. They were literally left in the complete dark. As the days went by, first the normal ration deliveries that were afforded to them through the partnership with the Millilith stopped, with no explanation why. But of course, that's a minor problem for the soldiers in the face of how dangerous and important this chasm exploration was. Exploration didn't stop. Personnel were simply sent to investigate. But, for various reasons, none came back. Either devoured by strange chasm beasts, poisoned by the oozing filth, slaughtered by the strange shadowy husks, or, unbeknownst to them, arrested by the Millilith. As their numbers dwindled, the soldiers grew ever more desperate, but still resolute. Eventually, they forged a deal with the treasure hoarders in the area. We will give you our supplies like weapons and such in exchange for food. Food the treasure hoarders had stolen, actually. Food was what was on every soldier's mind now, as they began to slowly starve to death in that space. Then, when the Millilith started to crack down on the treasure hoarders, the deliveries started getting more sparse. An earthquake at one point, probably caused by the travelers' dealings within the chasm, saw their last contact with the surface, Clitofo, disappear as well. And all the while, they were losing personnel to starvation or disappearance. No one ever made it back from the trips to the surface to find out what was happening, and so the members of Ninth Company stayed in the chasm and concentrated on their duty even as they became less and less able to fulfill it. For the Fatui, deserting is equal to death. Abandoning orders was out of the question. By the time the traveler finds them, holed up in a meager camp, weakly arguing over the chain of command, there are only 4 of them left. Their emaciated faces reflected just how starved they were. Too weak to fight, angry and confused. A couple tried to hold out on their dignity and refrain from outright begging for food, but that's all they could really think about. Having just lost another comrade during the night to starvation, they were angry and scared, although they tried to hide it. After a pitifully one-sided fight with the traveler, the senior of the group decided to put all hope in them. First, for some much-needed food, and then crucial information on what had happened out there. They would trade anything for these: weapons, intel, equipment. The traveler does take pity on them after hearing the story of their confusion, and they look into the matter, informing them that they have been abandoned and marked as enemies because of the actions of the Harbingers. They had stayed and suffered for so long needlessly. And even though the men didn't blame their indifferent superiors, understanding the need to sacrifice the weak for the greater good, the lowly officer acting as commander now made the call for them all to pack it in so they could head home. and he would bear the punishment, if there were any, for deserting. Those 4 tired, gaunt-faced men thanked the traveler profusely for his compassion and hoped that, perhaps in the future, if they ever met again, it would be as friends. Of the 64 proud men and women that set out from Snezhnaya, only those 4 came back, almost all because of a callous misunderstanding. Now, after all this, I have one honorary mention I'd like to share. The story of a little boy whose early life in an abusive home shaped the cold loner that he is today. That little boy was Kinich. When Kinich was a baby, living with his mother and father in their home in the Scions of the Canopy, his father had an especially bum-ass pastime of gambling away the family funds. He would take 3 days off for every 1 day that he actually worked, and would aim to make up the lost money by gambling with the little that he had. Sometimes he would win and bring expensive sweets for his little son and flowers for his wife. But more often than not, of course, he would lose. And when he did, he'd instead borrow money from a friend to drown his sorrows in a bottle. Sometimes he'd come home, a drunken mess, but remorseful, listening to the berating from his wife, little Kinich balanced on her hip. But again, more often than not, things would take a much worser turn. A dishes-shattering shouting match would ensue instead. And of course, his mother being the weaker one, Kinich's wife-beater father would always win these fights. She would end up taking the baby outside with her to her farm, an important resource with so little money coming in, to tend it while talking to the little one through her tears. One day, the man ended up gambling away the house, and the family was forced to move outside the tribe to more humble accommodations at the foot of a nearby mountain. The extra farmland was nice and all, especially since that was where Kinich and his mother took refuge when the fights got bad. She taught tiny little Kinich how to be a good farmer and how to make rope by hand, how to hunt forest boars, and he was good at it. But this new remote location meant the beatings could get much worse. After all, there were no concerned neighbors to step in when things got loud or out of hand now. With no one to hear the yelling, screaming, or crying, things went from bad to worse, until she couldn't take it anymore. One day, Kinich's mother quietly up and left in the middle of the night, leaving Kinich behind. Perhaps because he would slow her down enough for her husband to catch her. And who knows what would have happened then. So, instead she left the little child to endure the abuse alone. Kinich can't even remember if she said goodbye to him or not. All he does know is that he inherited her chores, her farmland, and her beatings. His only saving grace was that Kinich had so far grown into a fast, athletic little boy. So, more and more, whenever his father made a move to light into him with a stick or his fists, Kinich would sail out the door faster than his father could keep up, and in that way, he would at least delay the beating until the drunkenness had somewhat eased. Then one day, on his 7th birthday, Kinich got up the courage to ask his father if he had any news about his mother. You might imagine the response he got. His father pursued him furiously this time, red-eyed with his now constant drunkenness, chasing him through the cliffs until his sluggish, alcohol-ravaged body lost its footing and he plummeted off of a precipice, meeting his end at the bottom. Little 7-year-old Kinich was blindsided by this development. At the bottom of the cliff, when he realized this was it, he fought ever so valiantly to hold in the tears as he looked upon this man who had dealt so much pain and suffering to him, but yet was still his dad. After a long time of just sitting there, he used his father's grappling hook to painstakingly drag the man's body back home to their now empty house. Poor little Kinich lost everything on his 7th birthday and also gained his freedom, soured as it was now by abject loneliness. He continued to live in that empty house by himself now, using the skills his mother had taught him and the grappling skills he had picked up by secretly watching his father, to hunt and take care of himself, bringing his produce and animal catches to the tribe to sell so he could buy whatever necessities he couldn't make himself. The townspeople took an interest in this young loner of a child, seeking to find out if he could be helped. One of the tribe elders, Elder Liik, who had always felt for the child's family situation back when they still lived up there with everyone else, took particular interest in helping him, although Kinich believed he didn't need any help, or schooling, as was the deal at first. Of course, young children are not completely aware of what they need, so Elder Liik respectfully persisted. It was a lesson in patience, understanding, and love, but he was able to teach and guide Kinich into the young man that he is today. Utterly concerned with equal exchange because of the sins of his father's slothfulness, but a hero nonetheless. Still, even to this day, Kinich's most prized possession is a book that his mother wrote but never finished, called Silent Hill of Crickets. He has even shared it with his now good friend Elder Liik, blind to its many flaws simply because his mother had made it. Despite rather blunt criticism from Liik, who hadn't known that the child's mother was the author at the time, Kinich still loves the book. He has read it many, many times, always hoping that its unfinished state could perhaps mean that its author will one day come back, if only to finish it. Although there is definitely space for more straightforward representation of these darker subjects in the world of Genshin, one of the things I love is how subtle and yet deep these stories sometimes are. The dark poeticism of the portrayal of these things can be so much more appealing than overt visuals, which can become watered down and unimpactful. Sometimes just the right tone and words can make it all the more visceral, and that is what I aimed to do here, so that those of you who may want to experience these stories in a less roundabout way can do so. That being said, to those of you who like references, the sources on the screen can't feature exact quotes because the stories are read, understood, and then re-rendered in my own tone, so to speak. Those are my sources, but there are hardly any quotes. Hope that clears up the reason I present sources this way. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed my little compilation of stories of a darker flavor that have been hidden in the world of Teyvat. Please like, subscribe, hype, and share. And in a little while, I'll be back to discuss all the new lore and theories from the epic Luna 2 quest. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one.